Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. This week our American friend TJ is back and she's got some more questions for us. TJ?
Thanks, Dale. So here we are, winding down towards the election, or winding up, depending on where you're looking in Twitter. And I have a question about the good old Senate, which I am unusually fascinated by, perhaps, but that's also because it is one of the more exotic aspects of the Canadian government for somebody with an American background.
Uh-huh.
When it comes to the election, how is this going to affect how's it going to affect the Senate? I mean, even in terms of their to-do list, in terms of their calendar, does anything change besides who they're reporting to? So yeah, I just like some context on how the election affects the Senate.
Okay, well, what happens during an election is that Parliament is dissolved. So there is no Parliament for senators to sit in, basically. So generally what happens is that they have other work that they can do. A lot of it is their own kind of personal research projects or things that they're championing on their own, because most senators have some project or cause that they're pretty devoted to, so they will do a lot of work related to that during this period. But traditionally, senators would participate in the elections along with the parties.
So they used to participate alongside. That is interesting, especially given what I understand about a lot of which sounds like it may be rhetoric at this point, about the independence of the Senate in the last couple of years, or I guess since I've arrived here.
Right, right. So it used to be that the Senate was pretty much the two main parties with a couple of independents scattered here and there. So senators would generally contribute to the campaign in some way or another. Some of them would help plan it, some help, and some would just, do volunteer coordination and so on. But generally senators would play a role, and that's also because they were also the institutional memory of the party. So they would have a lot of guidance to offer in terms of, past campaigns and so on. A lot of senators were once elected as MPs, so they would have a lot to draw on from their own particular areas. So they used to have that kind of function. With this whole move toward a more independent Senate, that's kind of complicating things. The Conservatives are still largely in that same model where their senators will help out. Since the Liberals expelled their senators, you had a handful who might contribute to a local campaign and help door knock or something, but they're not doing it in any organized capacity. And then you've got all these independents now who had this charter that they drew up as for their independent senators group, which explicitly forbids any kind of partisan activity, because it's all about the appearance of independence as well as the practice of independence, even though we are conflating a lot of different terms for independence in the Senate. So it's going to create a bit of confusion. You're going to have a lot more senators who are at somewhat loose ends for the next few months, because we have a lot of new senators who haven't gotten really established into the institution and they don't have a lot of projects on the go just yet. I think we're going to find more than a few who are a little bit lost for the next few months, trying to decide what they should be doing. Should they even keep their office staff and not lay them off, which is a whole other thing, which is kind of ongoing in the background discussion.
So that is very interesting. And do you think that the independent senators, or any of those who have a few more minutes on their hands than others, will start watching each other a bit more? Do you think there's going to be a bit more naming and shaming in terms of the activities of other senators if they do get involved in local campaigns and such?
I think there will be some of that, if any of them do. I know there were a handful who were complaining that the rules that they put in place were a bit too restrictive because some of them did have partisan backgrounds beforehand. And also, I think there's going to be a little bit of, we'll say, snitching on their staff who may want to join campaigns and whatnot. And there was an attempt, based on grapevine, that I had heard that they were trying to ensure that their staff would also stay out of it, but that kind of got a bit, there were some objections to that.
I'm sure there were some objections to that. I do want to come back to something you mentioned earlier about institutional memory, because I find that as a concept fascinating and obviously incredibly important. And given the fact that, democratic elections in any capacity are heralded as the peaceful transition of power, right?
Yeah.
And a big element of that is that institutional memory, maybe on a larger scale than what we're talking about here. But as a sort of a student of the Canadian political system, what do you think about the future of how that institutional memory is captured by the Senate? Has it historically been kind of siloed into this party-oriented thing? Is that going to change? Are we going to sort of have a gap in between while we adjust?
We're definitely going to have a gap. And that's one of the problems with the way that the Prime Minister and everyone who's gung-ho about this new independent Senate don't really realize is that that is one of the features of the Senate. And it's on many levels. It's institutional memory for Parliament because it's just actually they've been there longer. Canada has one of the highest rates of turnover for any elected legislature. So we have a lot more MPs that cycle through on a shorter term basis than in other countries. So that means that there's less of that memory among the elected caucuses. And so when you've got an appointed Senate that has a longer tenure, that keeps them the repository. But that also is within the caucuses themselves, because you've got a group of people who've been there and done that, whereas you've got new MPs cycling through all the time. And that also, because they're also institutionally protected in that, they can't be fired, barring serious criminality. And also, they don't have to worry about the party leader signing their nomination forms. So they can be they can offer more pushback, more truth to power in the caucus room. And that's gone now, especially for the Liberals. So it's centralized power in the leader's office. So there is that gap there as well. So it's this dynamic that's been somewhat invisible in our parliamentary system. And in the rush to make everything independent and independent this and independent that, we completely ignore this institutional memory component. And nobody's going to appreciate how badly that's going to affect them until there's a big loss. The next time the Liberals lose power, the next time they're decimated electorally, all of the people who used to be around to help them rebuild, they've already shown them the door. So that's going to hurt them a lot in the future, and they're not going to appreciate that fact until it's too late. And a few of us have been trying to sound that alarm, but not enough people want to listen.
In terms of sounding the alarm, this is something that I had actually, I've always been kind of enamored by the idea of the Senate as a sober second thought, as per the writ of history almost.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to actually say, there were people in Canada at this moment who disagreed with X, Y, and Z that was happening in the world, right? That really fundamental, almost historical record contribution. But until now, it had never occurred to me the connection with the pushback in the caucus and in the room.
Yeah.
And that is a fascinating and actually very creepy development, because I didn't even know that was part of their purview until now I'm learning about it being taken away. This idea that a non-elected person who still represents and is respected by the constituents of the party, who everybody is beholden to, right?
Yeah.
In the electoral side, is going to be taken out of the conversation.
Yeah.
That was a very creepy prediction, Dale. Thank you for connecting the dots for that alarm for me.
You're very welcome.
Yes, I hope you do write and talk more about this leading up to the election, because I think it's something that maybe doesn't have a role as a direct commentary on the workings of the voting and such, but it's something that I think as Canadians during this period are looking at the workings of government, as people naturally do during an election, it's a good opportunity to really, again, connect the dots for other people as well. I had no idea. I didn't even think about the fact that all of a sudden that room is going to be an echo chamber for the leader, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, well, on that doom and gloom note, thanks. I'll see you next time.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.